Hey guys, Nike here, and I'm happy to present you with another incredibly overpowered build for open world Guild Wars 2 group events and solo play. This build has been around for quite a while in various incarnations, and you've probably seen Lord Hyzen use it to great effect to solo some group content that almost certainly was not intended to be soloed. This build is so incredibly powerful that I am satisfied to call it Guild Wars 2 Easy Mode, or even call it playing the game with God mode turned on. I am talking, of course, about the Condi Herald. This is a build that has more than respectable DPS and is among the tankiest builds in the game that actually is still able to do damage. While primarily a build designed for solo play, I have no problem recommending it for open world content that is done in groups, as well as it can have a great effect on your group. Again, as in my previous Mirage build, we will be leveraging the power of Celestial stats in a build that does Condi damage, makes boons, and has strong self-healing. That trifecta of criteria is what you need to really get the most from Celestial gear, and this build certainly fits the bill. That trifecta is also what makes the build so strong. Its damage is about 7% lower than a full glass cannon Viper setup, but has the tankiness of Trailblazers. Unlike Trailblazers, it has a ton of healing power and boon duration. The boon duration helps close the DPS gap by keeping up a higher amount of Might and Fury, and the healing power pushes its defensive capabilities a bit above Trailblazers. Essentially, we are getting a build that's tankier than Trailblazers, without giving up much DPS, even compared to Vipers. Expanding upon that, the self-sustain of this build is simply incredible. We get a very strong regen effect. We get healing from our runes, and we take advantage of the Battle Scars trait lines in Devastation. The result is that even when we take a big hit, we're never far away from healing right back up to full. Additionally, we can keep a shield on swap for an invuln button combined with a big hit heal at the same time. Also, we have really high prot uptime added to the mix, and our Herald heal skill is yet another invuln button combined with a big heal if used judiciously. All of these things together is a really compelling defensive package that makes the build insanely powerful and almost impossible to kill. I really want to express this in the most direct terms possible. This is the most powerful build in the game. No other build in any other game mode is as sanely overtuned as this is. If you play this build, it might just spoil open world and solo gameplay for you for any other build. There are a few others that sort of come close, like Trailblazer Scourge or Celestial Firebrand, but this is a step above even those exalted builds. So now that I have your attention a little bit, let's get into it and see what it's about. Alright guys, so let's get into gear. As I said before, we are running full Celestial gear in every slot with Rune of Tormenting. Rune of Tormenting's 6 bonus is just bonkers. It's one of the most broken things in Guild Wars 2. Each time we apply Torment, we heal for about 180 hit points, and considering most of our Torment inflicting skills apply multiple stacks at once, almost every attack skill we have on our bar is also a healing hybrid now. On top of that, our Malik's Elite is going to give us pulsing heals on top of the pulsing Torment. The reason why this rune is so broken is because in most aspects of Guild Wars 2, you have to choose between investing in defense or investing in offense. But Rune of Tormenting totally breaks that paradigm and allows you to have both. As far as our weapons go, our main weapon set is going to be Mace and Axe. The Mace is going to have Sigil of Torment, and the Axe will have Sigil of Strength. The Sigil of Torment applies more Torment in AoE when it procs, which means significantly more DPS and also more heals, especially when we're fighting large groups of mobs. And Strength applies more Might and helps the build maintain significantly higher DPS by helping us cap Might, which we would be unable to do otherwise in a solo situation. The sigil on your shield can be basically anything, But I went with Sigil of Doom because it gives you a nice damage boost when you swap to it, and since you probably won't be camping shield long term when you use it, you don't need something like Strength Sigil since you won't be sitting on that set for a while. And then lastly, our trinkets are all Celestial, as I said, and we will be using Malign Infusions, which work out to be slightly higher DPS, actually quite a bit higher DPS than Spiteful in this build. So the gear is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and with that said, let's move on to specializations. Alright, for specializations we will take Devastation, Corruption, and Herald. If you watched my Renegade video, you know how absolutely insane Battle Scarred, Thrill of the Combat, and Dance of Death are in a tanky build. This build doesn't make as much vulnerability as the Renegade build, so it totally doesn't maximize completely the value of these, but you still benefit a ton of sustain by taking them. And in a solo situation, these will help you enormously. If you do end up playing this build at group events where you have a lot of your boons and damage and even sustain isn't really a concern, and you want to min-max, you can change to Unsuspecting Strikes, Assassin's Presence, and Swift Termination. These will give you and your group a DPS buff, and they don't cost a ton of value since you don't need to focus on self-sustain nearly as much at large-scale events. But if you just want to fire and forget it, Battle Scarred, Thrill of Combat, and Dance of Death, and you are good to go. In Corruption, we are going to take Acolyte of Torment, Pact of Pain, and Diabolic Inferno. These traits are fairly straightforward boosts to our damage output with not really a lot of finesse or nuance to talk about them. Diabolic Inferno is incredibly weak, however, for a Grandmaster trait, but honestly the other options are even weaker, and overall the trait line is just incredibly strong at boosting our damage in every other slot, so even with the kind of lame Grandmasters, there is a ton of damage there, and there isn't really a lot more to say about Corruption. Herald is going to give us Elder's Respite, Shared Empowerment, and Draconic Echo. Elder's Respite makes our regen heal 20% harder, and when combined with the healing power we've invested in our gear, our regen ticks for a little bit more than 250 in this build, which is very nice. Shared Empowerment is very straightforward. It enables us to maintain a bunch of might, not only on ourselves, but the group around us. And Draconic Echo means that when we consume our facets, we will continue to gain the benefit from the passives, which will have implications that we'll discuss later in the gameplay section. One last thing to note is that you could, in group play, switch to Core Value instead of Elder's Respite. However, Core Value is currently bugged, and the extra boon duration from the trait only applies to yourself. If ANET ever fixes it, then that's something you ought to do. But for now, continue to take Elder's Respite for group sort of situations. For our legends, we are going to take Glint and Malix, if that wasn't already clear. If you ever need to go exceptionally tanky for something, you can switch Malix to Jalis, but this is almost never necessary in any normal gameplay. Alright, let's talk a little bit about gameplay. I'm going to focus on solo play because in group play the priorities are going to be a tad different. So foremost in Glint, you want to activate all your facets when you swap to Glint and immediately consume Facet of Elements. This is a very strong DPS skill and we want to use it when possible. Facet of Chaos you can keep up or consume as needed for CC. A lot of people will recommend consuming it right before you swap Legends to take advantage of Draconic Echo. But since the cooldown doesn't really line up with Legend Swap, in solo play this doesn't really result in any higher prot uptime, so I usually don't consume it unless I want the CC. The one thing I do recommend consuming before you Legend Swap is Facet of Strength. This will give you a noticeable amount of extra might when you're in Demon Stance, and you should be sure to do it. Our main damage skills are Mace 2, 3, and Axe 5. When we're in Dragon Stance, you always want to use Mace 3 after Mace 2 to take advantage of the Blast Finisher to get more Might. This is less important in Demon Stance since you won't blast Might, thanks to your Embrace the Darkness field, but it is best practice either way, so you should end up learning it that way. Our goal in Dragon Stance is to have all of our facets running and using our damage skills on cooldown so that our energy runs out right as we swap Legends, and then we swap to Demon Stance. Remember again to activate and consume Facet of Strength before you swap. The only facets we always consume are Elements and Strength. That said, the others can and should be consumed as needed for utility. Our heal skill is an Invuln and a big heal. Facet of Darkness is a stun break and applies a bunch of Vuln, which will give us some heals with Battle Scars. And Chaos is a big CC, so use them when needed. And thanks to Draconic Echo, our Grandmaster trait in Herald, there is less of a drawback for consuming them. In Demon Stance, we activate Embrace the Darkness as soon as we swap, and we use our damage skills. We won't usually swap back to Dragon on cooldown, but only once our energy gets low, which usually means we camp Demon for a couple of seconds longer. The other skills aren't particularly useful to us, but do note that Call of Anguish is a massive CC. Lastly, I want to talk about Facet of Nature. In solo play, it's not worth as much as Facet of Darkness, so typically we don't use it. However, in group play, it's worth far more than Facet of Darkness since you ought to be getting Fury from someone else in the squad, and I would leave Facet of Darkness unactivated and use Nature instead. Anyway, that's all there really is to discuss for gameplay, so I want to thank you guys for watching that, and let's move on to consumables. For consumables, the absolute best food for solo play is the minus 10% incoming damage, 100 Condi damage, 70 expertise Ascended food, but most people do not use Ascended food for solo gameplay, so I can't really recommend it. In terms of normal food, the strictly best food is plates of beef rendang, but it costs around 31 silver at the time of recording this video, which is prohibitively expensive for solo gameplay. So my recommendation is going to be red lentil sabozas, which is only slightly less damage, maybe like less than 1% damage worse than rendang, but it only costs at the time of this video 4 silver. So you can see that that is a far better value. For utility consumables, strictly speaking, the best is Writ of Malice, but that's also kind of outside the scope of solo play. And so in that case, I recommend Tuning Icicles, which also have the advantage of being dirt cheap and nearly best in slot. So that's it for consumables. So that about wraps up the guide, and I hope it is sufficient for everyone to get you going with the Condi Herald Celestial build. I played this build before the Armory came out with Trailblazer gear, and it was insanely busted at the time, and now being able to use Celestial gear, it's only gotten stronger. This build is incredible, and you will enjoy it 100% if you play it. Lastly, I want to chill a bit and ask you to follow me on Twitch and Twitter and all of that, as well as join the Hard Stuck Discord and participate in the community. Links to all that stuff below in the description. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.